welcome to The Rural Mum. Today we're talking safety on the farm, and you will be answering some of my safety questions as well as the community's safety questions here on farm. So can we please start by you introducing yourself, who you are, your background, and where you come from in safety?
Wicked. So, g'day. Thank you very much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here today. So, my name's Alex Thomas. I am based in Nairn in South Australia in the luscious Adelaide Hills, surrounded by the best produce of all time. I'm originally from a sheep station up in the northeast pastoral in a notoriously dry part of the world. And my journey in safety started way back in mining in like the early 2000s. And the long and short of it was that I learned all the wrong things to do before I started to gradually unpick all my own kind of biases inside this profession and then start to work closely with agriculture and fishing. And I've got a very personal story around that, which people may or may not be familiar with, but we can go into if we need to. And I guess the other thing I would add is that today, where that leaves me is two things, actually. I'm the founder of Plant a Seed for Safety, which is a rural social change initiative that seeks to just keep health and safety front of mind and bring people home at the end of the day. And the other hat is as a self-employed consultant and facilitator and speaker and things, which really is kind of the revenue raising side of my work, and is more specifically geared towards working with big groups of farmers, but also medium to large size big businesses in agriculture and construction and beyond. So safety's in the blood. I'm an eternal empath and I absolutely love what I do.
Great background, lots of different touch points for safety and lots of different perspectives. So I guess that gives a very rounded approach to what you do and how you do it. So for those who aren't aware of the personal story behind it all, do you mind sharing a little bit about that with us today?
Yeah, totally. So had the childhood that only, that people dream of, really. School of the year kid until I was about 12, and then my horrible parents sent me to boarding school. But like many people on the land during that era, and particularly in the part of South Australia that we were, Mum and Dad were confronted by a series of pretty horrendous droughts. So the 80 drought of 82, shortly after Dad started out at Parnaroo Station, which is where I grew up. And then we had the millennial drought. And through the course of that period, Dad diversified the business to go and muster and sell feral goats as a way of making ends meet and providing for his family, and got this nasty bug called Q fever. And then coupled with just, that tough as nails, stoic, old bushy mentality, he just continued to work ridiculously hard, and with a compromised immune system, got, Ross River virus, which lots of people have had. Diabetes, which then led on to heart failure, kidney failure, and multiple amputations, and was permanently disabled by the time he was 56, which is pretty miserable. But he's still around today, and he's doing well. He's on dialysis. He's got a lot of support. But the long and short of it is that I've been sort of looking after him in different capacities since I was around 15 years old. And when Mum and Dad split up and we had to sell the station, I think that hit him really, really hard. So there's lots and lots of different elements in there. I think we like to draw a line between physical safety and mental health, and mental safety, and I don't know, like all the different ring fencing things out there. But I think it's important to take a really holistic view on these things and not necessarily try and delineate between what's work, health and safety, and what's home, because we know in a farming environment that's virtually impossible anyway. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess as we sort of delve more into wellness, we're learning a little bit more that it is actually all connected as well. Good to hear that his old bushy instincts and personality is holding him here today still, and he's happy and he's got all that support.
Yeah, dead right.
So Alex, I guess for a lot of the rural mum community, we're moving to the farm for the first time, or we've gone away to boarding school, we've gone away to uni, and now we're coming back on farm, and we're noticing that there's a discrepancy between safety on the farm and that complacency of what is safe. So big question to start off, but where do we start implementing safety on farm, and how do we go about that in a business that may not be as receptive to safety as we would like it to be?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a massive question. So I think it comes down to a couple of things for me based on what you've said. So I think when we think of safety, and particularly when we've had the opportunity to work in different workplaces or potentially in bigger organisations or other industries where safety is maybe more of a focus, typically what we tend to think of is, policies and procedures and the need to kind of put processes and systems and stuff in place. And, inevitably what that means is a whole heap of paperwork. And I think because that message is so strong and it's shrouded in an element of fear, and like the regulator obviously pushes that message very hard, and so does the safety profession. And there is this inherent fear amongst people in agriculture that if you don't have the box to tick or the piece of paper, then you're going to get in trouble and you're going to end up in jail or whatever the case may be. And unfortunately, I think when we define safety on the basis of paperwork and compliance, we send ourselves down this rabbit warren of total overwhelm. And, the conversation becomes about that stuff rather than the things that we could be talking about and doing that will actually genuinely stop someone from getting hurt. The other issue with this is, when you hear the word complacency thrown around a lot, and completely respect, everyone and anyone that is passionate about safety and that uses it. But I think if someone came along to me and said, "Oh, Alex, like complacency is creeping in," or "You're being complacent," that's a very parent-child, I'm telling you off and assuming I know better than you kind of approach to take to a conversation, where really what we're looking for is we're trying to inspire someone to think differently or do something differently. And everybody knows that nobody likes being told what to do and nobody likes being nagged. So I think when it comes to facilitating change or, having conversations that stick about this stuff, I think we've got to work really hard to try and ditch the narrative that safety is about paperwork, because that is not going to stop someone from stepping in front of a machine or, like taking a guard off when it shouldn't be off or whatever the case may be. And the second thing is going, well, maybe complacency is not the right lens. Maybe it's about going, well, people do things a certain way for a certain number of years because it makes sense to them, because it's easy, because they've done it. And to them, it's the most efficient and safest way of doing things. And the reality is that changing habits is really hard. So I think there's this level of divisiveness between the safety profession and everybody else in industry, because the safety profession kind of assumes that they know better, when in reality we should probably be having a more inclusive conversation about, how to get a better outcome.
One of the key points I get from that is changing the terminology we're using when we're addressing whether it's our, parents-in-law, whether it's our parents, or whether it's our partner. So first, changing the language. So what are some of the terms that you would recommend that are softer, that come with respect in those conversations?
Yeah, I think it's such a great takeaway. Thanks you've already summarised the key point. But I think one of the unique challenges, particularly for women coming onto properties that have been owned by generations before them, is that you can't just bowl in and say, we should do this way, and what about the kids or whatever. Like, it's all very well intended, but it doesn't tend to land that well. Particularly amongst, mothers-in-law maybe, or maybe it's a father-in-law. The language is really, really important. So I don't, as a general rule, use words like hazard, near miss, incident report, investigation, policy, procedure. Like, that stuff just makes my skin crawl. I would be more inclined to make sure I've built a relationship, first and foremostly, that's built on trust and curiosity to understand, what does work look like here? Like, how do things go? Let me get into the nitty-gritty of this and let me understand where you're truly coming from. And then, when the timing is right, not necessarily coming in with an idea of doing something, but just asking really good questions will eventually lead to that outcome, potentially, anyway, or at least get people thinking.
Yeah. And so I guess with that instinct of curiosity and learning, how is that best gone about if you say not working on farm, if you're working off farm, how do you go about building that relationship and that interest without being like, okay, I'm going to go on the farm today and I'm going to learn about this and then we're going to talk about how we're not going to do it. Like,
yeah. It's a really interesting, challenging topic. But I think what this kind of drills back to in its rawest form is that we have a lot of work to do in agriculture around recognising and acknowledging diversity of thought and diversity and inclusion. And so if we're getting barriers up because we're not working in the paddock and we don't know what somebody else knows, which is obviously happens all the time, then there's a bigger question around, well, why aren't we valuing difference in perspective and asking for the unusual voice in the room to contribute to this conversation, because that's where the value lies. But that doesn't help anyone right now. So I guess if you're not in the paddock, I think firstly it's about finding the confidence to either go out and start building that relationship and spend some time in the paddock if you can get away from the house to do it. But I mean, there's no reason why you can't infuse your curiosity into conversations around the kitchen table or in the workshop or wherever the case might be. And timing is really, really important.
so
I mean,
important.
yeah, like if you you all know your partners better than anybody else does, and for some blokes, the best times when they're in the shower, someone it's they're in the toilet, someone's they've got a beer in their hand, or whatever the case may be. That time is critical for this stuff.
I did interview another mum, and we were talking about when an incident does happen on farm, you know, you need to make sure that everyone has come back down to a level of they're not in reactive mode. Because if you try to have the conversation too early, tempers will flare and everyone will feel like offended or attacked. So it's making sure we're back down to that baseline before we have that conversation. And I loved that you said, you know, for everyone that is different. And I think sometimes it's also having those conversations, you know, they might be 24 hours, it might be 72 hours before we have them. But also, yeah, the car, the shower, sometimes when you're off farm, you know, is the best time to have those conversations.
Very true. And I think I'd just add to that and say, you know, I think unfortunately the stereotype around safety is so negative and so punitive and so, you know, centered around blame, really. And I think that amplifies what's already a crappy situation when people that they're in trouble or that, you know, they've failed, whatever the case may be. And the sort of new school view of safety, and you probably view across this stuff more than I am, is that error is normal. Things go wrong all the time, and that's okay. It just provides an opportunity to learn. And when an incident does happen, I think, you know, really everybody should be coming from a place of curiosity and obviously wanting to learn, but also make sure that the person's all right.
Yes. Yeah. So we've moved to the farm. We've become curious. We're asking the questions before we come in as a safety officer. We've changed our terminology.
Yep.
So now, and we've talked about, you know, timings between when an accident happens and we have the conversation and where the appropriate or where the best place to have those conversations is. We're sort of heading down the path now of an accident has happened and whoever it is, your husband, your wife, your parents-in-law, your parents, they're not wanting to have the conversation. They're not wanting to have the conversation of, are you okay? They're not wanting to have the conversation of, how do we make sure this doesn't happen again? What's something that you can do, or how can you go about still improving or decreasing your anxiety on that, and then still making changes that aren't offensive?
I think it's really subjective. Like, it depends what's happened. And I think sometimes, like, this conversation can't be one-sided. It can't just be the female leading the charge or whatever the case is. I mean, there will be, like, safety is based on the consensus of the people involved in whatever's happening at the time. So traditionally, you would have seen this in mining. You have a safety department that sits in an office, they do all the work, and nobody else really gives a crap about what happens in safety land. But what that does is shift accountability to just that group, but not the other people actually at the point of risk. So I would, really depending on the situation, but I think you're always, there has to be at least one person who is the low-hanging fruit or has got half an ear cocked to this conversation. And I think the more you can empower that person to do some of the talking as well and help lead that change, then it takes the pressure off of you, and it'll inspire other people to join in as well. So I think that's probably, like, it's very generic, but that's probably where I would start.
Yeah.
But also just thinking about, for the tough as nails generation, like even then they've got, and you might have to look beyond your immediate workforce or beyond your immediate farm and go, well, who in this community does that person look up to? How can I plant a seed with them to have a conversation with them about, or just ask a great question to get them to think differently about this stuff.
Yeah. So if you are looking into your community and you go, there's a peer that everyone sort of seems to either listen to or at least chat to, at least, every now and again in passing. So if I'm wanting to have a chat to the peer, what are the types of things I'm going to chat to them about and the terminology I'm going to use? And then am I going to ask them to drop it in conversation to someone specific, or do I just plant the seed as broadly as talking to a peer within the community? This is an important note.
I think it depends on the outcome that you're looking to achieve, and I think it depends on the context, and I think that depends on the relationship that you've got with that person. And I think obviously you have to be very mindful of respecting what happens on farm to a degree, stays on farm, and being very, very diplomatic and strategic about how you have that conversation, so that it doesn't backfire. But, those people that everybody talks to most of the time, there's a good reason for that. And that's because they know how to handle themselves and they know how to handle potentially sensitive information. So, yeah.
So the main takeaway at that point is find who is the peer of who you really want to talk to if they're not being receptive. If we're new to the community, Alex, and we're not necessarily familiar with the community or with the peers, and we feel like we're not really getting through to the farm as a whole, and we're starting to build anxieties of ourselves, are there other steps that we can do as individuals that doesn't impact the farm but that will make us feel better, and reduce the anxiety around safety as a mindset change, or something that we can implement ourselves without impacting the farm to make that more comfortable? Does that make sense?
I think so. I think that the piece around anxiety and wellness for us, that has to be the priority, and that if there's something going on there, I think that's almost a separate piece to work on. And I know there's all sorts of challenges when you're living in the land in terms of isolation and breaking into social networks and all that stuff when you're new. My advice would be to get involved with sport on that front, but I've got two left hands and I can't. My ball skills are absolutely terrible, so I'm not one to speak in that regard, and I know not everyone's sporty. So, but with the safety stuff, I think from what I can gather, the question is, well, what can we do without impeding on the farming operation if we want to do something about safety? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
I think, again, it comes back to asking great questions. What could go wrong? How could it go wrong? What are you going to do about it? What else can we do about it? Excuse me. And if you can remember those 4 questions and have them regularly, then you are literally using people's brains to bring safety front of mind. And even if you don't get the answer you're looking for, they still walk out the door thinking about safety because you put it there. So You know, and there's other things like you can do in terms of taking a more strategic approach to dealing with this stuff. So, you know, in mining and stuff, everyone talks about slip, trips and falls and all that compliance rubbish. Let's not talk about that. Like, every farmer knows that an auger is a pretty dangerous piece of kit. So let's talk to what's already on people's radars and what people are already kind of naturally prioritising. Attach the questions to those priorities. Start from a basis of relevance rather than coming in and talking about paperwork or compliance or whatever. Because at the end of the day, as I said, paperwork's not going to stop someone from getting hurt. But if you're having conversations about the real stuff, then that might. So I think leveraging relevance is important.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alex, can you give me an example of that auger situation for someone if they're trying to come up with the words for, you know, a situation like that?
An example would be flat out in the middle of harvest, working in the middle of the night, using an auger. You know, everybody's just exhausted. It's dark. You know, there's maybe an opportunity for a 30-second conversation at the start of the night, or maybe it's a quick chat over the UHF. You've talked about, I don't know, mules or whatever you need to know for the rest of the day. Oh, by the way, is the auger on? Is the guard on the auger? Or have you had a chat with the crew about what could go wrong tonight, just to make sure that everyone's all cool? I don't know. The more inconspicuous you can kind of make it, the better. I think the most powerful way of having conversations about safety is when you get the people doing the work to come up with what it is they want to talk about. So I wouldn't if I was potentially a woman on a farm, don't put the pressure on yourself to know what these things are. You know, just ask what could go wrong and let other people tell you, and then it becomes more relevant anyway.
Yeah. And I love that you said, you know, as they're doing it, and as you're having the conversation, so you're not specifically ringing up to talk to them about that or just popping over for it. I used to set when I first moved to the farm and we were doing haymaking season, and I still do it periodically now, is I used to set my watch, and I used to go, okay, I feel the most tired around 2 a.m. and right before the sun comes up. So I would set my alarm, and whether I'm home with the kids or not, and my alarm would go off at 2 a.m. and I'd call my husband just for a quick chat. Oh, it's 2 a.m. Everyone's okay here. Everyone's in bed. How are you feeling? Do you need anything run up the paddock with you? Or I packed that extra coffee in your lunchbox, you know, have you seen it? How was it? Sort of thing. So I'm like, okay, I'm having a chat around that 2 o'clock danger period, and then I'm going to call back up just before sunrise to have those chats. It's enough just to check in, to see where they're up to, and to get them maybe over that next hot tide rise.
Yeah, totally. That's perfect. So it's kind of like you're doing safety but not doing safety. It's like giving, you know, a puppy dog a tablet in a piece of cheese.
Yeah, excellent. So Alex, can you tell me a little bit more about the projects that you do, and particularly for planting the seed for safety, and how that can help those within the rural mum community take this conversation further, benefiting themselves and the farm in the long run?
Yeah, sure. So Planter Seed for Safety is probably well known for the workshops that I come and deliver with groups of farmers or farming women, farmers also, or the speaking element, but probably more recently the community-based activities that usually accompany those workshops or those speaking gigs. So things like we did a line dance to the tune of "Staying Alive" by the Bee Gees for 250 people at a rural conference the other day, because it just sexes it up and just makes something different to what everybody expects it to be. Yeah, you know, we've got work shirts, we've got I've got a group of ambassadors actually through a partnership with a company called Syngenta, and those regional ambassadors are based all over Australia, and essentially we work together to co-design a series of fun initiatives. Like, you know, in the past we've done a national colouring competition for kids. We've done, what else have we done? We're currently doing the Safety Swagger competition, which is all about showcasing what good health and safety looks like in rural communities. So everything that Planter Seed for Safety does comes from a bent of being fun, positive, uplifting, refreshing, relieving, and it's all centered around obviously bringing people home at the end of each day.
Yeah, absolutely. So if there was a community or a group of people who wanted to get together and do an event or a workshop such as that, what would they have to do?
I would head to plantaseedforsafety.com and just shoot me an email. So that's plantaseedforsafety.com and just, flick me an email. And it's for, as in FOR, not for.
Yeah, perfect. That was going to be my next question. And so what type of layout or what type of topics is usually covered within the workshop that is, accompanied by those fun activities?
Sure. So, I mean, as you're well aware, work health and safety in the traditional sense of the word is scary, confusing, overwhelming, anxious. The whole thing is just not much fun. So the first couple of hours even of the workshop is really about debunking what it actually means to be compliant with the law and giving people the confidence to start to take steps forward, knowing that they're not only prioritising the health and safety of their people, but also they'll be compliant as well. So that's the first thing. And then helping each person get really clear on what the priorities are and what they need to work on within their businesses to make that change. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that sounds really, really good. So that's the end of my official questions, Alex. Was there anything else that you wanted to add in for food of thought for those who are moving to the farm for the first time or back to the farm after being away?
Oh, such a great question. I would just say be really kind to yourself. The fact that you're even thinking about this stuff means that you already care. Focus on asking great questions rather than trying to have the answers to everything. Don't feel like you're alone in this. Get other people involved and just try and keep it practical.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for today's chat, Alex. We will leave you all there. We've had Caroline join us throughout the interview as well, popping in and out. So if you do hear babbling throughout the interview, that is who it was. So thank you all for joining us. If you have any more questions or you'd like to deep dive any more into Plant a Seed for Safety, then all the links will be below in the description, as well as anything else that we've touched on in today's interview. So thank you very much for joining us here on the farm.